As the cost of living for millions rises, the Prime Minister tells us there is no alternative to his economic vision. Borrowing a phrase from Margaret Thatcher, Boris Johnson says higher wages is the key to rebuilding our economy.
You are reducing productivity and you are risking inflation and you're actually risking interest rates going up at precisely the wrong moment.
In the famous phrase, there is no alternative. There is no alternative.
Robert will give us his assessment of his interview with the Prime Minister, also on News at 10 tonight. The government launches an inquiry into the police failures that enabled Sarah Everard's killer to continue to be a police officer. Facebook's problems pile high as a whistleblower gives a damning testimony saying the social network knowingly harms young people.
The company's leadership knows how to make Facebook and Instagram safer, but won't make the necessary changes because they have put their astronomical profits before people.
How ditching gas boilers for heat pumps is turning up the political temperature. Our latest special report ahead of the Glasgow Climate Summit. And
turbofans coming up to flight speed and liftoff.
The final frontier for film, the space race, takes a new twist.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. The Conservatives' first proper party conference for 2 years has come at a tricky time for the Prime Minister. Bills are rising for gas and food, petrol and diesel have been hard to come by, and there are some empty shelves in the supermarkets. Today, Mr Johnson put the price rises and shortages of lorry drivers down to the world economy, waking up and the increase in demand before the global supply problems have settled down. But when Robert challenged him on the eve of his conference speech, Mr Johnson said it was time to move to a new economic model of higher wages and higher productivity. In fact, he said there was no alternative, a phrase that might sound familiar to those with long memories. The Prime Minister was channeling his predecessor, Margaret Thatcher. She used it to support her belief that market forces were the means to a better economy.
Boris Johnson, a wobbly ride, as it feels for most of us.
Gas prices are, petrol prices are, food prices are up. This is a very serious cost of living crisis, isn't it?
What we're seeing, and first of all, I appreciate that many people find the going tough at the moment and have done for a long time, and I'm afraid that the phenomena that we're seeing at the moment are very, very much part of a global phenomenon of the world economy coming alive, waking up, and sucking in demand.
The problem is that people are suffering. They are wondering, how they're going to heat their homes and buy food. And this is happening at a time when you have cut their income by reducing the universal credit uplift. You're increasing national insurance. You've frozen tax allowances. You're making them poorer.
Well, what we're seeing actually over the more than a year or so is an increase in wages, and it's high time that it happened, frankly, because I think that we've had an environment in the UK where we've accepted a low wage, low skill, low productivity approach, and that needs to change. And I would rather see people being paid more through good jobs and better paid jobs than because what you're talking about is taking more money in tax and pushing it from everybody and pushing it through the welfare system to subsidise low pay.
The pay rises that we are seeing for HGV drivers, for fruit pickers, for people in the supply chain are actually making the country less productive because, broadly, there is no investment at the moment and they are doing the same job for more money. So you are actually doing the reverse of what you want to do. You are reducing productivity.
No, most of our lifetimes, the UK has relied on a certain economic model, which has meant that we're basically per head per worker, we're less productive. It's a terrible thing to admit, but we're less productive.
You and I agree about this. Compared to Germany and France, it's a scandal.
And the United States of America, and even Italy, and so on. So the answer is not to go back to the old model.
But the transition from where we are to where you want to go will take years. And in the meantime, you are reducing productivity and you are risking inflation and you're actually risking interest rates going up at precisely the wrong moment.
In a famous phrase, there is no alternative. There is no alternative. The UK has got to and we can do much, much better by becoming a higher wage, higher productivity economy. We have a great deal, a massive amount of resilience and imagination in this economy, and we're going to get through it very, very well. I confidently predict, as I've said many times, that this Christmas will be considerably better than last Christmas. So,
can't be worse.
That
is not a fair comparison.
Well, look, I'm telling you, it's going to be much better than last Christmas, all right?
Johnson's great slogan is building back better, but working out which bricks go where to create an economy that works for everyone when living standards for millions are under such pressure, it isn't so easy.
Well, Robert, the Prime Minister seemed very confident that he is on the right path to recovery in his interview with you. But what did you make of his wider strategy?
Well, look, just to be clear, very few people are going to object to the Prime Minister's ambition of improving the skills of millions of people that would allow those millions of people to be paid much more than at the moment. The problem is it will take years to raise those skills, and equally, we're talking about productivity, that's the output of each of us. That requires big investment by businesses and indeed by the government, and again, that will take years. And the problem right now is the cost of living is rising, inflation is rising. We've seen this problem of supply in petrol forecourts. The associated issue is petrol prices going up. Energy prices are going up. In fact, gas prices in the wholesale market have gone up again today, which will be reflected in another increase in what we all pay come the spring. Food prices are going up. And as I pointed out to the Prime Minister, those wages for many people that are going up at the moment are not associated with any increase in the output of those people. In other words, they are what economists would call as inflationary, and they are stoking that inflation. Now, many people in the city, but actually in the context of my interview with the Prime Minister, many people in government are deeply concerned that the Bank of England, seeing this inflation, will raise interest rates next year. In fact, the markets are semi-discounting 3 rises in interest rates next year, which would lead to an increase in mortgage rates. So cost of living going up, as I pointed out to the government, or to the Prime Minister, he's making us poorer with his assorted tax rises. If we get mortgage rises on top of that, it is going to be an extraordinarily painful year, possibly 2 years for all of us, and a very difficult time for the Prime Minister.
OK, we'll see from his speech tomorrow. Thank you, Robert. Well, the star turn at the conference today was the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. She began her speech by praising police officers and the other emergency services. After that, though, she talked about what she called the unconscionable crimes of Wayne Couzens, the officer who kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard. They had no place in society, she said. She confirmed there'd be an independent inquiry. The first part will examine Couzens himself, his previous behaviour and opportunities missed. The second would look more generally at vetting practices, discipline and workplace behaviour.
It was a crime that shocked a nation. The murder of a young woman who was just walking home. But when Sarah Everard's killer was jailed last week, the police suggested women needed to be more streetwise. Today, the government bowed to pressure and ordered an independent inquiry into how Wayne Couzens was deemed fit to serve in the Met.
It is abhorrent that a serving police officer was able to abuse his position of power, authority and trust to commit such a horrific crime. The public have a right to know what systematic failures enabled his continued employment as a police officer.
Home Secretary, the Prime Minister said he trusted the police. What's changed? Home Secretary, should women trust the police?
It's still not clear how wide the scope of the inquiry will be. But among those welcoming it, a woman who says her own rape allegation wasn't properly investigated. She says no one really believed her.
I tell people I was drugged and I was raped, and I don't remember most of it. And I think if someone makes me choose being raped or reporting it to the police and being treated like that, it's like another violation. I wouldn't go through with it again.
One senior Labour backbencher says the inquiry must have powers to summon witnesses and look at police attitudes to women.
It's really important that this inquiry can look into how it was possible that such a dangerous man could serve as a police officer for so long, could be cleared to carry firearms, but also to look more widely into other cases involving allegations of abuse by police officers.
Meanwhile, a Conservative police and crime commissioner says the whole justice system works against the victim.
The court backlogs are unacceptable, and we do need to do, both as a government and locally, everything we can to make sure that they've got the resources they can to deal with this, because one of the problems with the backlog being so long is that women aren't staying in the process, and they're not staying in as victims, and they're not staying as witnesses.
But what do women who listened to the Home Secretary today think?
Do you trust the police?
No. I would like to trust the police, though.
I think if I was asked to get into a police car, I still would do so. I might have a second glance, second thought, but at the end of the day, no, I trust the vast majority of the police force.
There's no doubt confidence in the police has been shaken, perhaps why an inquiry was deemed necessary. Libby Vina, News at 10, Manchester.
Facebook has had a difficult 24 hours, to put it mildly. Today, one of its former data scientists told senators in the United States that at every opportunity, Facebook puts its astronomical profits before people. In a coincidence of timing, Facebook had barely managed to get its Instagram and WhatsApp platforms up and running again before Frances Haugen made one damning claim after another. She said bosses know its Facebook and Instagram platforms harm children, but don't say so. Senators likened that to tobacco companies in the past.
The choices being made inside of Facebook are disastrous.
Facebook now has a powerful new critic, a woman who accuses the social media giant of inflicting enormous damage on its 3 billion users. And senators agree.
The time has come for action.
The whistleblower is a former company insider who has handed over a trove of internal documents.
My name is Frances Haugen. I used to work at Facebook.
She said that Facebook is now so large, so opaque, its content so poisonous on our screens that Congress must intervene.
But I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. The company's leadership knows how to make Facebook and Instagram safer, but won't make the necessary changes because they have put their astronomical profits before people.
Senator Cruz.
Senators expressed outrage about the whole range of Facebook's products, especially Instagram's impact on teenagers.
Facebook's internal reports found that Instagram makes, quote, body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. And additionally, it showed that, quote, 13% of British users and 6% of American users trace their desire to kill themselves to Instagram.
The algorithms are very smart in the sense that they latch on to things that people want to continue to engage with. And unfortunately, in the case of teen girls and things like self-harm, they develop these feedback cycles where children are using Instagram as to self-soothe, but then are exposed to more and more content that makes them hate themselves.
Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's founder, is under pressure like never before as Congress and regulators circle.
The future is private.
But far from being contrite, his last social media post was of him sailing. But the storm is ashore.
Will my girls be proud of what I did today?
He should ask his own researchers.
As opponents spend big money to cut Facebook down to size.
Increasing anxiety and depression.
But there's one thing that I hope everyone takes away from these disclosures. It is that Facebook can change, but is clearly not going to do so on its own.
And with those words comes a major challenge to Congress. For criticizing Facebook is easy, regulating it is much harder. The desire of senators to confront misinformation and social media poison is now colliding with one of this country's foundational principles, freedom of speech. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
When women in Northern Ireland were sent to mother and baby homes with their unplanned pregnancies, they were hoping for support. Instead, many had to give up their newborns and were forced into unpaid labour. 14,000 girls and women who already had been rejected by their families for once getting pregnant were subject to cruelty. Now an inquiry has been recommended into what happened to them behind closed doors over a 70-year period.
These buildings were once thought of as sanctuaries, a place to help women who'd fallen pregnant and supposedly lost their way. But instead, many who once lived here say they were stripped of their human dignity, forced to give up their babies and work without any pay. The women of mother and baby institutions in Northern Ireland have felt silenced for decades, until now.
It was absolutely devastating to be incarcerated, and that is the only word I can use.
Adele Johnston had her son while living at a mother and baby home at 18 years old, her first child, who she never wanted to give up.
We give birth alone. I walked down the corridor with him in my arms and I handed him to a nun who turned her back and walked away. And I didn't see that child for over 40 years.
Her experience is one of thousands shared today in a new report calling for a public inquiry so these stories are never lost. The institutions are known to have run across Northern Ireland between 1922 to 1990, with at least 14,000 women and girls reported as living there and carrying out unpaid labour in workhouses known as Magdalen laundries. Girls as young as 12 were sent there, the oldest 44. A third of women, though, were under the age of 19. You can still see the buildings like this one behind me where thousands of women say they were shamed into silence because of the stigma that surrounded being pregnant and unmarried, something they say still affects them today and the children they were forced to give up. Maria Cogley was put up for adoption, which she says her mother was forced into. It took 40 years for them to meet again.
You grow up not really knowing anything about your history, and the institutions and the churches involved, first of all, need to take accountability. They need to put their hands up and say, yeah, we did do these things.
Recognition, though, that for many barely scratches the surface for the justice they long for. Families now want a full investigation to expose exactly what happened behind these doors, so the trauma women suffered is no longer ignored. Sangeeta Lal, News at 10.
And France is coming to terms with a different but even bigger historical scandal, the sexual abuse of more than 300,000 children by Roman Catholic priests and other people associated with their church. The first French investigation into the worldwide crisis found 3,000 perpetrators whose crimes were covered up over a 70-year period. 80% of the victims were boys. The Vatican said the Pope had learned of the findings with great sorrow and was praying for their victims. The very worst of the fuel shortages at filling stations may be ending. Perhaps it is just as well of the 5,000 visas on offer to HGV drivers from abroad. Only 127 have been taken up, and only 27 of those are to drive fuel tankers. The Defence Secretary says the Army is prepared to keep transporting fuel to the forecourts for weeks or months if necessary.
Cars were still queuing for petrol in North London this afternoon, but while the fuel crisis may have eased in most places, the shortage of tanker drivers hasn't. And today the government confirmed that part of its solution to offer emergency visas to foreign drivers has attracted just 27 applicants. No surprise to those who represent them.
The working conditions in the industry are not great, just like general in Europe. So workers in Europe will not quit their jobs for a 3-month adventure in the UK. They will simply not do it.
In all, the government hopes to attract 5,000 haulage workers from overseas to help deliver food and fuel this winter, though ministers were trying to downplay the disappointing uptake.
People can earn a lot more driving a lorry now than they could have done previously, and we've got to get out of the habit of just undercutting people by constantly bringing people in when we should have people doing the job here.
But while the government had promised to make it easier for former drivers like Christopher to return to the industry, delays in renewing their licences is adding to the backlog. He's been waiting since June.
You've got thousands of drivers out there that have got licences that can't drive because they're waiting on medicals or they're waiting on applications and renewals. It's a disgrace.
The DVLA says new licences are being processed within 5 days, but in the meantime, experienced drivers are being poached from other sectors, like coach companies, who are now facing their own shortage. Drivers like David are suddenly being offered lucrative deals to drive a lorry instead of a bus.
Are you tempted?
I am, yes. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but I am tempted to go back on the lorries. I could be putting an extra £10,000 to £15,000 in the bank every year.
Those numbers have already lured away 10% of this company's drivers, and they can't fill the vacancies.
Every day it's a firefight. Every morning you come in and you're dreading the call or a letter on your desk from a driver giving his notice in because he's decided to move over to haulage. And if it carries on at this rate, it's going to get to the stage where we're not going to get the school children to school.
The Prime Minister insists he's not worried about staffing and supply chain problems and says temporary visas for foreign drivers are not a long-term solution. The low take-up suggests it may not be a short-term fix either. Ben Chapman, News at 10.
Now to the latest in our series of reports entitled Last Chance to Save the Planet. In the run-up to COP26, that's next month's climate change summit in Glasgow, we are looking at how climate change affects us here in the UK and how we can change our behaviour. One way, scientists say, is by replacing gas boilers with heat pumps which extract energy from the ground or from the air. Parliament's main environmental advisor has told us that the government has to make its boiler replacement plans much clearer.
Britain's thermal footprint can be seen from space, and almost 90% of home heating visible in this satellite image comes from gas. Just outside Leeds, this household changed to...
It's better for the environment. I'm like anybody else. You know, I'll go along with things that help the environment. But I think it'll be a long time before everybody gets one of these, and it actually makes a massive difference.
Expect to see more units like this on the side of houses, with just over 60,000 installations expected this year. But government targets aim for 10 times that within 6 years.
Over the last year, I've never been as busier. It's really taken off now. I think the public's starting to be conscious about the environment, and we're getting phone calls now that people want to reduce the carbon emissions and help the environment.
Heat pumps use an outside unit to absorb warmth from the air or ground, even down to -15 degrees. A compressor boosts that heat, feeding radiators and water systems. By 2025, gas boilers will be banned from new UK homes, and by 2033, government advisors want all replacement gas boilers banned too. Taking out our gas boilers would cut carbon emissions from home heating by 73%. Though grants may be available to some, the upfront cost is typically £10,000.
This is the Research and Development Centre into Greener Heat.
Here they say costs will quickly fall for the first time, making heat pumps a mass market option for millions.
It's big. A lot of people would think it's ugly, and they're 3 times the cost of a gas equivalent.
Good evening.
Aren't those really big drawbacks?
I totally believe that over the next 18 months we will get this down to the same price as a gas boiler that you currently have in your home. Some people may not think it's the most attractive thing in the world, but it's significantly better for the environment. It's a significantly more efficient way of heating your home, and sometimes there are trade-offs.
Found in the North Sea during the 1960s, gas became a matter of national pride.
Natural gas is pumped through the mains at far higher pressure than the old coal gas.
But it creates CO2, and the UK's leading advisor on climate change told us government isn't doing enough.
The government doesn't have a plan for moving to heat pumps or indeed a range of alternatives to gas boilers, and it's going to need to have a better plan if we're going to make these targets that Parliament has set.
Today, this household made a switch which millions of us are eventually likely to follow. Some climate change problems are very close to home, but the solution could be too, not just for us, but also for the planet. Chris Choi, News at 10 in West Yorkshire.
Now, British diplomats have been back in Afghanistan today holding talks with the Taliban. They were discussing the humanitarian crisis and how to make sure those who want to leave the country can. Shihab, our political correspondent, joins me now. Shihab, what could these two sides possibly have to discuss?
Yeah, well, as you say, it's the first time that British officials have been back in Kabul. It's the first time they've met with senior members of the Taliban. So there were plenty of things to go through, like you say, the humanitarian crisis, evacuations, getting people out who want to leave. I understand this was an initial meeting. It was an opportunity to open pragmatic discussions between the two sides that just haven't happened as of yet. The two sides are looking for very different things. The United Kingdom wants to get people out, people that would have helped the British Armed Forces when they were there, who weren't able to get on those evacuation flights. The Taliban, they're looking for financial aid, humanitarian aid. They're looking for recognition as a legitimate state. Now, that recognition hasn't happened as of yet. You'll know that there is no British diplomatic mission in Afghanistan. This meeting, I'm told, was facilitated by Qatar. What this shows is that the United Kingdom is willing to talk to the Taliban. This was about starting conversations. Where will those conversations lead? Well, only time will tell. This was an initial starting point, but both sides have two very different objectives as they sit down to talk.
Shihab, thank you very much indeed. Now, for something a bit different, the pop superstar Adele has teased her millions of fans with a snippet of her comeback single and confirmed it will be out next week. It's called Easy on Me, but the clip she's released is only the opening bars. There's no singing. Adele hasn't released an album for 6 years. And last but not least tonight, to the final frontier in filmmaking. For well over a century, space has been portrayed on screen in a whole host of different ways, but 220 miles above us, for the first time, a feature film is being made actually in space. The plot involves a doctor being called to the space station to save a cosmonaut's life.
Turbo pumps coming up to flight speed and liftoff.
This is the new space race. On board this Russian mission to the International Space Station, a film director on the right and an actor who will make the first movie in orbit. Klim Shipenko and Yulia Peresild have been training for 3 months for this 12-day expedition. In their movie, aptly named Challenge, Yulia plays a surgeon sent to the space station to save another crew member, will be played by one of the 7 other people on board.
Despite all difficulties during this path, which wasn't easy, this is very interesting and it's a huge satisfaction, and even the thought of it happening is beautiful.
В этот чудесный мир за эти 3 месяца.
For the past 3 months, we've been plunged into this wonderful world. It was hard, it was difficult, with no time for sleep.
Weird music.
There was time for art, but less than when you're preparing for shooting on Earth.
The music is weird on this show.
I hope to make up for it before the launch. Life has changed. Of course, space changes lives. It cannot be otherwise.
It just seems very jolly and kind of 80s. It's morning telly. Stop getting over it.
Space has always had a part to play in film. Through the years, its depiction has changed with technology. But the actors have always remained firmly on Earth.
Initiating spin.
Gentlemen, you two have been brooding ever since we returned to the ship.
But while the Russians are first, the Americans are very close behind. Next week, Captain Kirk of the USS Enterprise will boldly go where no Hollywood sci-fi actor has gone before, when he boards the next flight to space, courtesy of Amazon owner Jeff Bezos. And at 90 years old, William Shatner will become the oldest person ever to travel to space. Commercial flights to the final frontier mean outer space is becoming even more accessible as a movie set. So many more Hollywood actors could find themselves shooting their next film among the stars. Stacey Foster, News at 10.
William Shatner actually goes to space. That's it for tonight from all of us on News at 10. Good night.